Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone joining us from across the globe. Thank you for joining our webinar, Building World-Class Sales Professionals. I'm your host, Zirba Abbas, PR Manager at xiQ. A few housekeeping items before we begin. We'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have a question, please feel free to send it through the Q&A channel at the bottom of your player. We'll be answering your questions at the end of the session. Today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session and is accessible through registering on the website. Lastly, we'd encourage you to share this webinar within your social networks. The organic evolution of B2B sales has accelerated as a result of the recent pandemic. The B2B sales motion has changed. As organizations look ahead and plan for the post-pandemic economic surge, a key challenge they face is aligning the right skills and sales professionals for the new reality of B2B sales. Joining us today is the Honorable Dr. Howard Dover, who will be discussing how he builds world-class sales professionals. Dr. Dover is the Director of Center for Professional Sales at the University of Texas at Dallas, where he works to ensure that his students and his corporate partners stay on the cutting edge of modern selling methods and motions. Dr. Dover studies the impact of digital transformation on buyer behavior and sales performance outcomes. He and his co-authors have published the first academic papers in the field of sales enablement over the past year, and he's writing a book to explain the sales innovation paradox. Students from his classes and the UTD sales program have developed a reputation for being top performers and disruptors of the status quo. And we have Usman Sheikh, founder and CEO of xiQ, which is a next-generation AI-powered SaaS platform for B2B sales and marketing. Throughout his career, Usman has held leadership positions in product management, sales enablement, and digital commerce globally across companies like SAP. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here. I'll hand it over to you, Usman, and you can take it from
Thank you, Zirwa. Thanks for the introduction, and good morning to everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. Dr. Dover, good morning. It is such a pleasure and an honor to once again have you on our webinar. So that's really, really cool. If we move to the next slide, folks, to the audience who may not have heard or may not know Dr. Dover, he is the pioneer of professional sales education, and as the introduction mentioned, his students have won a lot of sales competitions around the globe. Last Friday, Dr. Dover invited me to participate in a sales competition, it was a sales role play competition. And when Doctor says that he's keeping companies, partners, and his students on the cutting edge of what's happening, keeping everybody sharp and on their toes, this competition, folks, let me tell you, was so lifelike. It was so excellently done. It just amazed me. I've been in professional sales related roles for the last 30 years. And just seeing Dr. Dover, how you were, in a way, putting the students through a ringer, but it was such good education. Tell us a little bit about that. Why, how, it was a really intense experience. And I think the students were really kind of taken aback as well. So tell the audience a little bit about this competition and how this comes about. What is the intention of putting the students through such a tough training course, if you may?
So the purposes of our pro sales event, which is what you witnessed, this is an elite group of students. We get about 200 students every semester in the introductory class, of which only 20 get accepted into our advanced instruction. It is competitive acceptance. There are only 20 slots. These are the kids who want to be the elite of our program. And as you pointed out, that often means we're the elite around the country and around the globe. And so we have a really great student body at UT Dallas. I think UT Dallas is only 50 years old. And we're probably, as some people like to say, either you know who UT Dallas is or you don't read, because you don't understand it's an emerging school that was funded by TI. So we get really smart students, really, really smart students. I like to say we don't have a football program, we have a chess club. And that tells you everything you need to know about UT Dallas, that kids choose UT Dallas and know we don't have a football program. So I'd like to say we get good raw talent to start with. If I were at any other university and I threw what you saw to them, I'd probably be fired. But because I have such sharp students, they really hunger for challenging scenarios. They really hunger to, we give them cases like Adobe was the client, and it's their Marketo Engage product, which is an AI product. And we identified that the AI product actually didn't have personality profiles to it. So we said, well, wait a minute, xiQ does. So what a great opportunity for our students to immerse themselves in the idea of xiQ, which they use in the classroom thanks to your generous donations. And then with Adobe, Adobe's a partner of ours, and say, how would that go down? How would xiQ actually approach Adobe Marketo Engage? And then how would they sell that? And the first line would be, of course, being a product extension, an API call, right? That they could do an API call. So the students, that was round one. And then round two was maybe we could develop a deeper partnership. And so we use these kind of scenarios for several reasons. Number one, it forces our students to understand the modern state of where AI is impacting our field and probably for the future, right? So this is not, you and I both know that the technology you have and the technology that Adobe is using isn't adopted across the whole spectrum. We're in the early stages of the diffusion pattern with people accepting this and learning, and where we're not at a mature cycle by any means in AI technology adoption. So we want to be ahead of that curve with our students. And so that's what you witnessed, is that we use role plays that are modern and futuristic. And so that our students, as was pointed out in the introduction, we try to create students that are going to be disruptive.
And it was like the Navy SEALs training course equivalent. It's literally you putting them through something like that, and they're going to come up battle ready, hardened, ready for the professional world. So I really commend you on that. Not condemn, commend you on that.
Well, there were a few students condemning me the day up. I think they're happy now.
But it was amazing, very real lifelike. Dr. Dover, if you can, guys, share the slide and move to the next one. Tell us a little bit. I mean, this is amazing. I honestly had not heard about professional sales training till I met you about 2 years ago. And then thanks to you, discovered there's a whole world, a whole universe of schools that are now starting to actually teach students on how to enter as professional sellers. Tell us, where does this originate? Why do you do what you do?
Well, a few years ago, there's a lot of, there's a bunch of universities, and the University Sales Center Alliance is one group of sales centers around the country. There's over 60 of them. And then Sales Education Foundation actually puts out an annual report that lists all the schools in the world that are trying to develop some degree of a sales program. The sales education over the last decade is moving into a better adoption pattern. I would say 10 years ago when I started, the number of schools doing what we were doing was maybe 20, 30. Now I think we're getting in the hundreds. Most of the Pac-10, for example, out there in the West, most of the Pac-10 schools, Pac-12 schools are looking at or building sales programs. Not all of them, but many of them. That was not even on the agenda 10 years ago. I got started because during the Great Recession, I was a newly minted PhD. I was out in Maryland in a University of Maryland system school. I was 30 minutes from the beach. I had this beautiful home with this treed area where I could sit and do research. So I had, professors' gigs are beautiful because, I had to teach 9 hours a week, 12 weeks a year, 2 times a year. That's not bad. And the rest of the time I was allowed to do esoteric research. And so I would go and, we'd study and create and do what you got your PhD in. And for the first 2 years of my professional life as a professor, Every one of my students, even my D students, got jobs in Washington, D.C. So I was like, this is wonderful. It didn't matter what I taught them, right? Didn't matter at all. Then that Great Recession hit. My A students couldn't even get an interview. And so that all of a sudden, I started talking to companies in DC as we got deeper into that recession. And I actually joined a group that's a beautiful group called the Direct Marketing Association of Washington, DC Education Foundation. It's very long, but DMAWEF, which was designed specifically to try to bridge the gap. And I said, hey, what do I got to do for any of you to actually talk to my students? And Usman, they listed stuff I wasn't, I was like, there's no textbooks in that. There's no courses in that. And that's where I began to discover the disjoint, right? The gap between what academia is putting in the textbooks and what industry is actually doing. In the sales and marketing field, in the marketing field specifically, the gap is quite large. And then I tripped up on sales competitions. I just tripped into it. And I said, Terry Lowe from the National Collegiate Sales Competition, it's actually the NCAA of sales. There's actually a tournament every April. There's another tournament every fall. I'm going to tell you, we like the fall one better because we've always been in the top 10 in the fall, and we were number 1 and number 2 the last 2 years. We don't, the Atlanta Big Dance is challenging for us because we've only broke the top 10 once. So we don't know why they don't like us in Atlanta. But anyway, Terry runs a great show down there, and he invited me, and I witnessed exactly what you saw. And I saw this competition, and by the way, the 2 kids I took, nobody was hiring during this time. My 2 kids got job offers, multiple offers. And I said, my gosh, here's the gap, right? Here's an organization that's bridging the gap. And so then I changed what I did. From that point on, I said, I'm never going to be irrelevant again. And you saw the fruits of that. I go to things like Dreamforce. I go to the AAISP Leadership Summit. I try to get out there. I go to Gartner Sales and Marketing and Sales Leadership Summits so that I'm on the top of what your clients are hearing, the CSOs are hearing, and I'm injecting that in the classroom as quickly as possible so that my students are ready to be a change agent to the CSO when they get hired.
Beautiful. And I think you're doing an excellent job. I've, as I said, been in sales related roles for over 30 years, and sitting as a front row in watching this competition is extremely lifelike. And I think it really prepares. I was telling our sales team as well, I wish they could have either witnessed or we could have run them through something like that, because that really, as I said, battle ready, prepares you for the battle in real life. Dr. Dover, believe it or not, it's been almost a year since we had you on the webinar. And if you recall, that webinar that we had was around the pandemic had just come out. It was back in April of literally about a year ago. And we were one of the first companies that organized a panel, including yourself, to talk about the impact that coronavirus and the pandemic was going to have on how work is done. You've seen you've seen the recession and now the pandemic. I would imagine a lot has changed. What is it from your perspective in the journey that you've been going through and the different stages, economic as well as other stages? Where do we stand and what has really changed in the last? I think there are some dramatic changes. What are you experiencing and what do you call out as the big changes sellers are facing these days?
Well, I think the first thing is that we were seeing dramatic change pre-pandemic. So the buyer was changing, the technology explosion into the field of sales specifically. MarTech has kind of run to a mature state, but the sales tech space, which Nancy Narden has a beautiful landscape of all the different technologies. And so we've had an explosion of sales technology. We've had a major shift in buyer behavior pre-pandemic. So if we go pre-pandemic, And then the other interesting explosion is we've had between 700 and 1,000% increase in the role of an SDR. And at the same time, we've actually had a reduction in overall headcount in traditional sales roles. Forrester actually put out a report in 2015 claiming that the overall headcount in sales would decrease by 20%. They were wrong and they were right. They were wrong because they didn't understand the wave of SDRs. So if you bring in SDRs, you actually had an increase in the number of sales headcount during the period of time that Forrester was looking at. However, if you strip away the SDR function and you really look at just the headcount of an AE and other roles related, we've actually had more than a 20% reduction. It's interesting as we went into the first few quarters of the pandemic, according to LinkedIn data, and this is where it gets fuzzy, we didn't see a reduction right away. And the reason why I call it fuzzy is because it's not like a sales leader is going to say I'm unemployed when they might hold on to their old job and not update their LinkedIn profile until they get the new job. So we don't know if there were layoffs. We couldn't see it in LinkedIn, but there was really no movement. In fact, if anything, we actually saw increases. This is so crazy. We actually saw in the first 2 quarters increases in headcount across 20 US markets. That just was mind blowing. However, when I checked about, and I think it was February I checked, we actually had seen major reduction across the board of almost 10%, including SDR, by the way. So now we go SDR and sales roles. We actually saw a 10% cut. Some markets like San Francisco saw extremely deep cuts in the number of sales headcount. Now, the question that's interesting, and this I can't get at, LinkedIn has given me a little bit of data, but not enough. They're kind of sticky on the data. The trend line is, the question is, was that headcount reduction because I looked at the 20 major markets, or was it migration into the outside the 20 major markets? And so one of the people at Economic Graph at LinkedIn said, actually, we're experiencing this global, not just national, but this global move out of the cities, and because of the pandemic and the work from home. So really, we don't know if that's headcount or transition to rural outside of the 20 major markets, but interesting flux going on in both the buyer and the seller. Work from home means that everybody's available, everybody gets on a meeting, the CEO can be contacted like that, and so can all the other executives, and they can join your sales calls quickly. I think Chorus and Gong have put out some data on the amount of decision makers popping in on early stage meetings. So we've got, obviously things are going over Zoom, and the face-to-face meetings have died off. I think Zoom fatigue's real. I think we're all kind of tired of doing this. But yet, and so there's debate, are we going to stay here? Are we going to move back? And so I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, I think if we look at our clients and what we are noticing is that definitely the traditional account executives who were always in person have really felt this the most, because those water cooler discussions, the ability to pick up intelligence, on the ground intelligence, build those relationships, that's disappeared. Also, because of Zoom, the role has become much more of an inside sales role rather than an outside sales role where you're moving. And some people that were coming towards the end of their careers decided to take it early. They said it's just not worth the shift. So maybe that's some of the people that we're seeing. Definitely migration out of the cities. We live in the Bay Area and San Francisco, everybody pretty much moved out. And interestingly enough, the rents have also dropped significantly now. So there was some balancing over there, but definitely the sales motion has changed. So if we go to the next slide, what is our next question that we're talking about, which is that in this, we were just talking about the water cooler discussion and ability to pick up on the ground intelligence and use that in sales. And traditionally, and I think will always be, information will be of key value in unlocking deals, using it to win the trust of potential buyers, to highlight new avenues. Information comes in handy. Given the fact that we have gone more virtual, and hopefully, yes, we start resuming, coming back and maybe having conferences as well, what sort of information and how should B2B sellers leverage information in this rather virtual, less human environment? What would be your recommendations and thoughts on that?
Well, I think one of the things that you and I would agree is that in the old world, sure, an SDR would create a contact, but so would you if you were at a conference, right? If you and I were at conferences, we're working the rooms, right? I'm not somebody that drinks, but a lot of people go to the bar and spend the evening and meet, and you're prospecting. You're building your network, you're finding leads. And when you start a relationship that way, when you and I run into each other, let's say we've never met before, but we're both at the Chicago AAISP event, and we sit there and we're talking, we're getting breakfast together. You say, what do you do? I say, what do you do? And we get to know each other a little bit before we ever have a meeting, right?
Yes.
And good salespeople can pick up some cues and kind of figure out some things. And then we've kind of opened up the ability to have a second conversation. Well, that's all gone. That's all gone. I mean, it's not like we're running into people. Nobody's running into people. In fact, Dr. Fauci will say, no, you're not supposed to run into people, right? So we're in a world in which we're introducing ourselves to somebody without any of the pre-moment. So now we're always flying in blind. And so one of the things that we tell our students is context and situational awareness are essential to having a productive first conversation. You can't wing it. Don't get me wrong, if you're cold calling has its own dynamics. You're going to call down a list and you're just trying to get the people who answer the phone. I'm talking about you choose a target, right? I'm going to ABM a company. I'm going to say, I'm going to use Southwest Airlines. If I want to talk to Southwest Airlines, I'm not just going to go to one person. I'm going to try to figure out all my key entry points. I'm going to identify the people I think I have a connection to, and I'm going to try to understand the situational context of the company and the situational context of the individual. Well, how do I do that? It's a boatload of research, unless you're using modern technology. I don't know how many times I sit down with my students and they tell me they're working an account. And I say, all right, let's talk about the modern motions. So you check their LinkedIn insights and you saw what their growth is. You saw how many numbers, how big their sales org is. Are they shrinking? Are they growing? And then you looked at their xiQ dossier and you looked at their funding rounds and you looked at everything that's going on. Are they active in social? What are the new announcements? What are their key strategies? Then you looked at their xiQ profile and figured out what kind of personality they had before you contacted them. Now, the sharp ones say, yes, I did all that. The ones that are stuck say, oh, no, I didn't do any of that. And I said, well, why didn't you do that? You don't have situational awareness. Because when I'm going to contact you, you're going to agree to a meeting with me, Usman. In today's world, we're willing to do meetings a little bit more. But you're not going to be willing to give me anything more if I don't show up with situational awareness and contextually prepared to discuss something meaningful with you. Because I don't have the bar meeting or the breakfast meeting that we used to have to break the ice. So what do I do now? Try to act chummy I don't even know how to act chummy with you. So do I bring some value and context? And by the way, this kind of changes the dynamic of who we maybe need to recruit in this world, right? Because the skill set changes, the motions change. And when I call you up and act like I actually can think about your business, that I've been thinking about you and I've been thinking about your business, and I'm relevant to what you've announced, whether you got a funding round and whether you hired a new, recently, I don't know how recently, but you added Lois to your group, and that would be interesting to say, oh, it was great. How's that working? And, what was the intent there, and have something relevant to say.
Yes.
Right. Then all of a sudden you go, oh, I'm talking to a human. I'm not talking to a salesperson. I'm talking to a human that actually did some work. And maybe, just maybe, we'll have a contextual, situationally relevant conversation. And then all of a sudden, we might actually have a real conversation about what maybe we could do together.
Beautiful. If I were to just summarize it, situational awareness is the modern day goodie bag, if you may, that I can go and use that information to start building conversations, laying nuggets across, putting breadcrumbs together, and as you said, break that ice that traditionally we could do when we were at that breakfast. Now we can do it by using much more contextual, situationally aligned information. And actually, I would venture to say this, Dr. Dover, that is even if we're having the face-to-face discussion, equipped with that information, the quality of that discussion, and hence the ability to open the door and the relationship will be far superior than if I were just talking about the baseball game and how the Bears did, right? So
sure. I mean, listen, we have modern tools. There's a lot of modern tools. You've got, Zoom info allows you to figure out how to get the phone number, right? We've got xiQ that will tell me the personality profile with some degree of probability. I can get a company dossier. I mean, you and I both know the company dossiers either are there or not. I mean, if they're there, they're so valuable. If they're not, by the way, I think the fact that they're not there is extremely valuable. When I sat down and one student gave me a company, I pulled up xiQ, I typed the name in, and I said, there's no dossier on this company. So then I go to LinkedIn, and I go, oh, that's because they only have 10 employees. They haven't had any funding rounds. And we had a completely different discussion about that company. Not that that company was not a good contact or prospect, but actually in this particular case, they were outside our ICP right at that moment.
Yeah.
I said, why you're having a meeting with the wrong customer. Let's move on. Let's move on. Let's not waste their time and our time. So I think given these modern tools, my friend, Dr. Lef Bonney over at Florida State came up with this idea of being agile, not using one methodology, but using the methodology that is situationally relevant. And so it's his thinking and research that's brought me to this concept of situational awareness and situational relevancy. He was looking at it from when you're in a meeting, identifying where they are in the buying process, and then deploying the right method. I've actually extended it into the prospecting space and said, given the tools we have, we can be so relevant. Don't get me wrong, there are times where we cannot be relevant, but that's called marketing. When you're going to blast things out, and I think you guys have a tool on that side of the fence. Exactly. I'm ignorant of it, and I know you keep on begging me to quit.
I was coming. You're like, pushing me to speak. I'm going to speak. But go ahead. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. We are huge proponents. Our whole foundation of our company is on that situational awareness and context. You don't have situational awareness and context, you're useless. I've seen this so many times, and it's literally as blunt as that. And so we have channeled that whole idea of situational awareness into and context into marketing as well. We call that context, Dr. Dover. A client of ours actually named it being in today's conversation today, right? And that is so important that we can, the rate of change of what's happening in the world with AI, with pandemics, with digital transformation is so fast. With cybersecurity, these things are changing so rapidly. We have something new to talk about every single hour, if not every single minute. And how do you channel that into a contextual conversation? That's a different discussion. And love, as I said, I'd love to be able to introduce you to that part. and we'll take it offline.
Well, I think I want to come back to, this fact that when we talk about, we just talked about modern motions. And yet our sales organizations are stuck back in old school thinking. And so the challenge with what we just described is it's more than just turning on the technology. It's actually changing the motion and the training, and to a degree, it actually changes, if not even opens up the talent we can actually bring into the field. Because now we're talking about somebody that thinks, analyzes, and adapts versus relies on straight charisma. Don't get me wrong, if you add charisma to that, you're unstoppable, right? But it's interesting that now you take an introvert or analytic, right? And we had some conversations the other day about the winner of the competition, right? And the old school world would be you need D, right? In the DISC profile, you need dominant to be sales. And she wasn't a D, she was an I. She was actually somebody who understood the situation, was able to analyze it and adapt, and right. So we open up the number of people that can do the work when we bring in modern motions. But most of the sales field is not ready or accustomed to taking the modern motions. And this is where we at UTD, one of the challenges and the opportunities we face is that we give our students work to do with clients. They actually go out and actually bring people into our events and develop partnerships for us. And the students initially will do what every salesperson will do. Cut, paste, cut, paste, cut, paste, drop. You got to do it quick, right? Got to get all my activities down, do the call, do the call. Actually, it's all email first because I don't want to do anything. LinkedIn, one and done, one done, one done, one done. And because, first off, they're not trained. Second off, they're lazy, right? Get it done, see if it happens. And by the way, here's the reason why that gets done. People get lucky. My friend Joel Laban has a Harvard Business Review on luck. It's a great piece. And if you ever run into Joel Laban, you say, "Tell me about being lucky," and he'll light up and he'll talk for 20 minutes. But salespeople get lucky, and the problem is that when they get lucky, it reinforces whatever they just did, right? So I do stupid and I get lucky. But how would you like to take luck out of the equation? How would you like to have modern motions where you still take luck when it comes, but you make luck?
Luck is not a strategy.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. If you put yourself in the right position, you find luck. So it's kind of, that's what Joel Laban talks about. But, part of this is we do reinforce the bad behavior, and it works. The bad behavior actually works. That's why most people do it. But what's amazing is, and you and I know this, you have data on this, I have data on this, you have data on your product, I have data on modern motions. When you do modern motions, Microsoft's demand gen division found a 6x performance differential the last time we talked to them by deploying modern motions. They increased sales by 600%. They increased their headcount by 1%. How? Modern motions. They made sure that their people were doing modern motions. And so my challenge is to let my students iterate. They're going to do the simple and get the luck, but most of them are not going to get the luck. And so then we iterate, we give them about 5 to 6 cycles. Most of them are failing with each cycle until they transition to modern motions. And then what we find is when they go out into the field with modern motions in their minds, and they understand, they don't need to even perfect. They just have to have in their brain the idea that there's situational awareness and there's modern tools that will continue to enhance my capacity to have situational awareness that will either.
Hello, what happened? Guys?
I'm assuming it's the connectivity at his end, because we can hear you and you perfectly well.
Yeah, I think he was breaking up a little while as well.
Yes.
If you don't mind just unsharing that screen for a little bit, we can actually, when we send the recording, we
Sure.
can.
So,
Oh, there
so
you
the
there
number
you
one people at both Adobe and Qualtrics were our people. And when I interviewed them, I said, "What are you doing?" And I didn't prompt them, Usman. You know what they said? "I'm constantly probing and changing and using tools.
Yeah.
Constantly probing and changing. I'm modifying, right? Situationally aware. I'm constantly situationally adapting." And it's just part of that's the modern motion. I'm not using a methodology. I'm using skills to adapt to my situation. And I'm using the tools to make me aware and relevant.
And that's what we discovered as a result of your sales competition as well. That uncovered it, and then we both know Scott Gilliam and the work he's doing at Carbon, mapping personality types to sales roles.
Isn't he
What?
a bright guy?
Yeah, he's a good
He's
guy.
a handsome, bright guy.
And what we discovered was that the role can now be done beyond the charismatic
Yeah.
um, sports star, right? It can go much beyond that. And your latest competition winner wasn't influencing; it was an eye. I did more research as a result of that. I was also very curious, and interestingly, the research is showing that eyes also make good salespeople. So that brings us to our last question, Dr. Dover. We have a great audience. What would you say are the three key things that make so we've talked about situational awareness, contextualizing. What would you say in this modern day environment are the three most important skills? Or let me just open it up like, what makes a great sales guy? Maybe you can give us your top three.
Well, we did some work with LinkedIn a couple of years ago. There's a team out of Ryerson University in Canada, and this paper is currently under review. So I can't describe a lot of it, but I can. LinkedIn worked with us to go look at what are the modern skills, right? We know what we need, what we have. What are we needing into the future? And so LinkedIn agreed to harness their whole global database and give us some data. And the first thing that we came out with, the number one thing that we came out with that research was, and it backed up the same thing Gartner had found about 4 to 5 years ago. So it's consistent. The analytical skill. Because it really transactional opportunities are transactional in nature, right? So the transactional work is being digitized. So and that isn't being digitized will stay transactional as long as I approach you in the street of San Francisco and ask you for money and you give it, they'll continue to ask, right? And if somebody continues to knock on your door and you buy, they'll continue to knock on your door, right? Because it pays. If it pays, we'll keep the behavior going. So, but more and more of the bigger deals are becoming more and more complex. And it's harder to get those sales done because if they're not transactional in nature, they tend to be more complex, which then requires you to be able to not deal with one person, but deal with many people over long periods of time. This requires the skill to understand the situation, analyze it, and prepare a strategy and execute. That's called analytical skill, right? And that's the number one skill that came out of two pieces of research that I've seen. One of them that I'm working on with Karen Piesker out of Ryerson and Willie Bolander out of Florida State. So I think that's the first thing is the capacity to analyze information, and so then I'm going to go with attributes versus skills because I think the attributes create the skills. I think you have to be agile. And so you have to be constantly iterating. You have to be constantly adapting to the situation that's around you. I think that's an attribute, not a skill. I think you've got to develop that attribute as a person. And then I'm going to go with the two things that I think my dear friend Ash Deshmukh told me years ago, and I still think it's true. the two things any salesperson needs, and if you can get this, you can take them anywhere. Number one is they have to be coachable, which comes back to the agility piece, right? A person who's coachable, it means not that you can coach them and they'll listen. It means that you will coach them and they will alter behavior, right? They'll change, they'll modify. So you can be coached and you're willing to change. Once again, that comes back to the agility piece. Then the next one is, and you and I know this, you gotta follow up. You know, I don't know how many deals get dropped and closed, or, you know, how much do we leave? All of us in an industry leave on the table because we don't follow up. And some of the sales engagement platforms, I think, are going to help us there. Once again, using technology to either automate or augment, right? And so sales engagement, if you put it into your sales engagement platform appropriately, it should sequence the follow-up piece, but people have to follow up. Listen, you get a deal going, you get all excited, but you don't ever do the necessary work to follow up, you're going to die. So if you can follow up and you're coachable, right? Agility, analytics. The beautiful thing is a lot of those are choices, right? These are choices. We can choose to develop these attributes and then make them skills. And by the way, almost any personality type could do that if they desire. Maybe a little bit more costly. So hopefully that's, I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but that's my view.
I think that's really, really good, because as you were listing down those things, I was thinking, if I had asked you this question 10 years ago, would this list have been different? Um, and then the second thing that was coming to my mind is that as a manager and as somebody recruiting salespeople, this is in the order that you said: analytical, agile / constantly able to adapt, coachability, and then follow up. I mean, two of those, I agree with all of them very much so. Coachability is something that is new to me as well, but I realize the value of that so much in people. And I appreciate what you say, which is that it's not just doing, but it's changing behavior to actually and adapting, right?
We
I
have
think that's really, really well thought out. What would you have said, Dr. Dover? Just curious, if 10, 20 years ago this question was, would the answers be the same or have they changed?
Well, I'm gonna throw one other piece and then I'll answer your question. You probably don't know this because we don't promote this as much. Do you know that every student you evaluated had a coachable? We have a coachability number on every student in our program.
Yeah,
and they know it and we know it, and we give them that number, and then it adds to whether they get into our elite program or not. It adds to whether we actually hire them into our center. I think 10 years ago, 10 years ago, I was much more naive about my field. So I think I would have said the ability to have a meeting and the willingness to prospect. I think that's what I would have said. I think I would have simplistically said those things, right?
I think the playing field has also changed. I mean, there's a lot more players. It's become more sophisticated. There's a lot more digital avenues. You know, the breakfast meetings have changed into digital touch points that you can have across LinkedIn and different social media and so on to get them to there. So I think that makes sense. I also think that, you know, one other thing that we talked about, like, you know, without a professional sales training, a lot of people end up in sales because they think, hey, this is something that I'd like to do. They've been successful at a few things because those bad habits paid off. And they end up in this role only to materialize shell shocked a little bit later, realizing things don't match up because there's a lot of hard work, there's a lot of thinking, there's a lot of listening that needs to go in, and there's a lot of dedication and perseverance that's required in follow-up. So they kind of miss the mark. They think it's all about travel, it's going out to golf games, it's, you know, having those drinks, but there's a lot of preparation, there's a lot of hard work. And by screening them at a professional sales training, I think you do a lot of justice to the profession as well as to the students who have an early warning system, so to speak. Hey, is this something like that Friday competition? Is this something I want to go through? It might.
Right. Does that energize you or does that frighten you? And we actually have them do live prospecting. There's 2 studies by Willie Bolander and the Florida State group. I left Bonnie's on one of them. They're very, very powerful studies around sales educated students. Study number 1 indicates that sales trained students versus regular hire. So you go to the job fair versus a sales program student, right? So this is assuming collegiate recruiting. The sales trained student will outlast. So they'll stay with you longer. So your attrition goes down. That makes sense, right? They chose to be in sales. They actually focus on sales training. So your attrition gets less. Second study is a little bit more interesting. So off the street hire with 2 to 3 years of experience, actually, I'm sorry, 3 to 5 years of experience versus a collegiate hire from a sales program with no sales experience. Which one would perform better? I'll go quickly because we're at the end. And so normally I do dramatic pause and we discuss it, but clearly the experienced person outperforms on hire date. However, at 18 months to 24 months, the collegiate student breaks even. At 36 months, it's 2x to 3x performance differential. Now, with our students, we're finding that actually in the first year because of, we just have that eliteness and the specific things we're doing. So, actually the reality is, here's what happens. You and I both know it. As you point out, most people fall into sales. They don't choose sales, they fall into sales. And then most managers get promoted not because they know how to manage, but because their company didn't want to lose them. So, and then they don't train them. And then most training is product-based, not sales-based. So we bring people into a profession that fall into it. We don't really train them on the profession enough. And then we give them managers who know how to do it. They're the Michael Jordans of their world, but they surely can't teach people how to dribble, right? And so it's one of those things that's the world we run into. It's no surprise we have massive turnover and frustration. So anytime you can do anything to change that, university sales programs do that. I'm not the only one. The University Sales Center Alliance, Google it. There's probably a center near every one of the people that will listen to this. Go reach out to that school and get involved. And be involved in the university education and sales programs of your area and see if you can't bring in better talent. By the way, that talent will infect in a positive way the organization.
Yeah. They bring in a lot of the key best practices as well. And the ramp up period is much faster.
Yes.
Dr. Grover, every time I speak with you, I learn a lot. This is really eye-opening. I think our audience also learned a lot. There are a few questions, if you don't mind sticking around for just 2 minutes. So first question is, does your University of Texas offer any type of distance learning curriculum for sales professionals?
Not at the moment. We have brought in Billy Bob Brigman to work on executive education, and the first deliverable we're going to do is going to be live in person, and we're waiting for the pandemic restrictions in Texas to lift before we can launch. But we intend to be building some over the next 5 years. It's on our 5-year plan.
Okay, great. Anonymous attendee. So could he be more specific on modern motions with regard to how to reinforce bad behavior? How to reinforce bad behavior and what kind of specific modern tools that help sales folks? So,
well, I got a whole book. I got a whole book on that's coming out. So I think, modern motions really mean, I think part of the motion is before you do the outreach, you go to the tools to give you context and a situational awareness so that you adopt relevancy in your messaging and in your meeting.
Yeah.
It just changed. If I do the work ahead of time, that's a modern motion. What makes it modern is that I have tools. See, the thing is, Usman, you know it and I know it. I used to do a keynote where I described that we now can equip salespeople in an Ironman suit. But the problem is, if you put me in an Ironman suit right now, I'm going to hurt myself. If I put you in an Ironman suit, you're going to hurt yourself. You've got to train that person. You're going to fly. If you've ever watched the Ironman series, it's funny watching him figuring out how to fly. He hurts himself. But it's not just the flight, right? It's the fact that you got to learn how to fly. You've got all this information sitting in your face, just coming up whenever you need it. That takes training and adapting. And so what does it take? It takes iterative learning. You can't just throw all this on somebody and expect them to pick it up. You have to allow them to try and fail, try and fail, try and fail. And that's where university education is more valuable. We allow our students to try and fail 5 to 6 times. That's why they're better equipped when they leave. When you're out in the field and you try and fail, you sometimes get fired. That's the dilemma we have as a field, right? Is that when you try and fail, I may fire you or you may quit. And so that's our challenge. How do we allow iteration and potential failure as people are learning the modern motions? If we don't learn how to do this, we have to go for only new people, which doesn't make any sense. So I think that's where enablement is becoming very powerful. I think enablement could be amazing. I don't know that it is amazing, but it could be amazing. And it is so necessary given everything being thrown at. You need enablement. You don't just need training, you need enablement to figure out what should be in the Ironman suit. How do you train? How do you measure? How do you increase performance? That's where Microsoft just continually is looking in that demand gen group. They are amazing at analyzing the data and adapting, analyzing the data and adapting. That's how they get a 600% increase.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Dr. Dover, I am your perpetual student. I love it. I think what I've heard today, and I'm sure our audience, like-minded individuals as well, this is really, really eye-opener. And you've really showed us today that what is that modern sales motion? How have that gone around, changed? I love the Iron Man analogy. And back when I started my career at SAP in 2001, I started working on what SAP referred to as the customer engagement lifecycle, which is the buyer's journey. Mm-hmm. And back in 2001, we were already of the opinion that you needed to influence your buyers significantly earlier in their thinking process. So transition and establish yourself as thought leaders so that you place the idea into the head of the prospective buyer. And since 2001 to now, we've developed so many online tools, marketplaces, etc., to educate and help buyers that they are spending, and buyers come now more prepared than ever when they talk to sellers. So as you say, that if you do the research and the context before the meeting, rather than, oh, what hit me? I should figure out what's going on. That just little correction, I'm saying the word little correction, but it's actually a huge correction. It's a seismic shift actually from, and as you said, you have to have the personality type to really invest, think, analyze, prioritize, and then work in that order.
So Gartner over the last couple of years has went to Clayton Christensen and developed a jobs to be done model in the buying sector, and it's a beautiful presentation that Brent Adamson has done and their team over at Gartner. But this idea that there's jobs that the buyers are doing, and it's a great presentation. We don't have a lot of time to talk about it now, but it's just beautiful. And one of the things, just once again, adapting, right? You asked me my curriculum, that we're actually shifting this semester on how we teach advanced based off the jobs to be done framework of Gartner, because it incorporates spin, it incorporates value selling, it incorporates Miller-Hyman, it incorporates everything. It gives better context, because the first thing you need to do is figure out where is this individual and where is the company in the jobs to be done framework? Are they at vendor selection? Well, then I got to move quickly. They know everything, right? Are they at problem identification? Well, then I've got to educate them, right? Or are they at, gee, they don't even know what the problem is. Now I have a complete, now I'm in challenger, right? So there's just these, am I at requirement design, right? I know what my problem is. I've searched for a solution. Now I'm building my requirements. So, you know, wherever they're at in the jobs to be done framework, that then, once again, this comes back to situational awareness, right? When I talk to an individual and I talk to a company, where are they in the process of buying? It's of course related to the buyer journey as you just described, but it's just some great work that's been done by Gartner that gives us a good framework. But it's tough because we're all so married to our existing methodologies, and we know how to deploy them, right? Because we can go hire somebody, we can go buy books, and our trainers know how to do the methods they know how to do, and yet the modern world needs things that are a little tougher. It's a little tougher. And once again, I come back to, I think sales enablement has the opportunity to rise to help organizations really bridge this gap, but it does need to rise to the challenge, not just amplify training or amplify tech. It has to amplify the strategic go-to-market strategy.
Yeah. Dr. Dover, it's always super engaging and enjoyable talking to you. We could be talking here forever.
Yeah.
And we would love to. We'd love to have you revisit us maybe in the fall.
We just put on a show and go on the road. Italy first on your dime, though. Remember?
No problem, sir. You've got to. So really appreciate your time. I think lots of words of wisdom. I learned a lot just in this conversation. I always learn in conversations with you, but I learned a lot in this conversation. Best of luck. Thank you for preparing those sales students. As a recruiter, as a manager, I know the value that brings into into companies having professional sales students. So thanks, and thanks for all the sacrifices you go through, the 9-hour work week that you go through to get these guys.
It's a little bit longer than 9 hours nowadays. Ask my wife. She's like, you don't get paid for all that extra stuff now. She remembers the 9-hour weeks. She's like, hey, what happened? I married a professor. How come you're not around anymore?
Exactly. That discussion can go many different ways.
That's right. All right.
I'm going to hand it over to you to help close this down. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Dover and Usman, for your input and insights today. It was a very enlightening discussion. And thank you, everyone. That's all the time we have had for questions today. We've received more questions and queries, and we'll try to address as many as we can over emails and phone calls. For the latest updates on B2B sales and marketing, follow us on LinkedIn. You can also follow the link in the chat to download the xiQ app from the App Store or Play Store. You will receive a recording of this session in your mailboxes within 48 hours. If you have any questions or you want to learn more, you can log on to our website, xiqinc.com, and schedule a free consultation with us. Thanks again for joining us today, and we hope to see you in another one of our webinars.
Thank you, Zirba. Excellent job. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Dr. Dover. Bye-bye.